Welcome everybody. It's fantastic to have you all here for our third official sort of summit in this room. Last year, due to the pandemic, we did the event with children and young people now digitally, which was sort of similar content, but over the whole week. So a huge thank you to everybody for joining us. I've got a bit of time this morning just to talk you through a few things that we've been up to, a few developments and things that I think you might be interested in, and sort of slightly set the scene. I will also talk you through the agenda. Just a huge thanks to Aaron for introducing today, and I didn't write a speech, but you know, thank you so much for that. And one thing I just want to reiterate, around the room is bits of paper with a QR code on it. If you find one of those bits of paper and scan it with your phone, there's no conference agenda or pack because of COVID restrictions, and we're trying to minimize the sort of paperwork that's around, but there's a digital pack for the conference, so you can go on there, load the web page, and you've got all the agenda, all the papers, all the reports, everything will be on there. We are recording all this, and after the event, most of it will be rebroadcast on that web page as well. So if you want to catch up afterwards, you will be able to do so. I just want to say it's a massive effort actually getting in this room. And I would say huge thanks to our entire team, the team here in Parliament, to Jonathan, Laura, Lydia and others who've corralled and got this together. Security is always pretty tight, so there will be people dripping in and they'll just come and join us and we'll get going. It's nice to be with human beings. It's nice to see people above their shoulders and actually see how tall they are or whatever, because all sorts of people that have come and gone in the sector over the last 2 years and since the pandemic, the last 19 months. And it's just great to see you all. So thank you so much. There's a few people I just wanted to point out. So I don't actually think he's here yet, but we are being joined by our opposite number, my opposite number for Scotland, Tim. So I'm really grateful for Tim to come down. COP kicks off today. They're a bit busy in Scotland, supporting young people's voice at COP26. So I'm grateful for Tim for joining us when he arrives. We've got a range of young people from different organisations, from our Equal Equity Programme, our young researchers, Scouts I Will and others. So it's fantastic to have you here. Welcome. Your contribution is just as important as everybody else's, if not frankly more. So, you know, we want to hear your thoughts and opinions as we go through. It's Youth Work Week. We made it. I mean, it's, you know, it's from an NYA perspective, it's like we got there. We finally got there. We've launched it. Champions of Youth Work is the theme for this year. And before you leave today, please have your photograph taken with the board that says you are a champion of youth work, and then tweet that out on social media and make as much noise this week as possible. Youth work is a really special set of principles, practices and behaviours, and is one of the most important aspects for so many young people's lives. For the most marginalised, those that really struggle in the education system, in communities, youth workers can be the huge difference between that transition from childhood to adulthood being a success or not. And it is a privilege to work and support so many great youth workers and those that work with those workers. Now, whether it's academics training up future workers, whether it's our frontline volunteers, whether it's people in the uniform sector, the outdoor learning sector, it's a huge team effort across the country to support our young people. And let's be honest, what's been over a decade of quite challenging times. And so we've got to recognise that. Later on today, we will hear from our minister, the new minister from the DCMS, Nigel Huddleston. He can't physically be here, but he's sending us a video with a presentation, which I think it's quite narrow and short, but we will see what he has to say. And then we're being joined by DCMS officials who will join the panel and we'll sort of take some questions and things. And we're grateful for them to do so. When Diana Barron agreed straight away to come and do a whole session, and then the reshuffle happened, and then you have to get the new minister's diary, and things don't always work out. So we're going to make the best of this. There's lots of train challenges as well. So well done to those of you who've made it. I didn't want to get going without sort of touching on the pandemic. By the way, anyone who's watching all our webinars, this isn't a quick webinar catch-up. We're not going to run you through it, but and we're still at green, not amber. But I wanted to put this up there because I just want everybody to remind everybody across the youth sector that we are not out of the woods yet. We have yet to really have really cold weather, and we've yet to see the impact of flu on top of COVID-19. And there's been lots of calls for Plan B, and NYA is ready if Plan B is needed. And we'll be going to amber, unfortunately, but not there yet. Keep going and doing what you're doing. But the key things around being COVID responsible, just didn't feel I could stand here and do a speech and not touch on these really important measures to keep our sector safe. So if you are an influencer, if you have an audience within the youth sector, please keep pressing these messages out there. Please keep encouraging people to follow them. We know it's really tedious, but it is making a difference. Somebody from one of the health sectors reflected on the other week to me that actually the guidance that the NYA has worked with Public Health England, DCMS, and a whole army of smaller organisations and national organisations who've advised us along the process. We've saved lives. Fundamentally, that work in the guidance has helped protect the lives of workers and families, and from that, it's a huge honour and a privilege. It's complicated stuff, but it is an absolute privilege. Through the pandemic, everything changed for everybody, but particularly for the NYA, and I really want to thank our team. I'm really proud of the Youth Work Support website, and I know Katie's here from UK Youth, and colleagues from the Mix and others that within days wrote a new website, created hundreds of resources, pulled it all together, put it all in one place to support the sector. We continue to update the site, we continue to work together on it, and a huge thanks to our colleagues in those organisations that work with us. It was a huge team effort. There have been other things that we've done, all the guidance. We've got a new safeguarding hub, which is out there now to provide advice and guidance around safeguarding. We're quite geeky at the NYA, and well, actually, Adam's quite geeky at the back, our researcher. And Adam mapped about 1,000 safeguarding courses and discovered that only about 3% of them had content relevant to community-based settings. Tons for schools, tons for children's homes, tons for all sorts of early years settings, but actually youth settings in the community, very small. So we've got funding, and we've developed an entire suite of training and test resources that you can go and use and share. So please encourage colleagues to use this. And the NYA Academy is going from strength to strength, and is providing free training resources and support, and you can go do free learning, which the DCMS have funded us to support with. So I just want to touch on a few things that we've sort of been doing through that pandemic before I kind of move us to the future, really. Quick one for around the NYA strategy. So we came up with a new strategy. We wrote it in February 2020, and we were all ready to launch it in April, and then lockdown hit, and then suddenly that strategy kind of felt like this was not much use. So we put it to one side, but as we're coming out of the pandemic, we've been picking that up, dusting it off. You can download it on our website. We've also got a digital version of our strategy. So actually, if you're interested in what we do and how we do it, you can go on there, and it's a bit like an e-learning course, and over sort of 10 minutes, it will talk you through what the NYA is about, who we're trying to support, why we're trying to do it. We know that we don't do a huge amount of work directly with young people, but we enable almost everything else that goes on with young people to happen if it's done through youth work practice. We do a lot of work with young people, but we do an awful lot of work when it comes to youth workers. And you can find out about our strategy. There are 3 key strategic areas to our plan. So we're about connecting and leading. You are here because we're trying to connect you all together. We're trying to take the sector forward. We're trying to lead people through the future. Growing and improving, growing the scale of the youth sector, improving the quality of it, growing the workforce, because we're having conversations about how nightmare it is at the moment to recruit in the youth sector, and improving the quality of the skills across the sector. There's been no real mass investment in CPD in upgrading the skills of youth workers for over a decade, and it is being noticed. Directors of Children's Services saying to me, look, I'd love to employ more youth workers, but they're just out of date. And there's no training, there's no support to get them up to speed. So we've been trying to address some of this stuff with organisations in this room. Like, huge thanks. And then learning and influencing. So how do we learn? I'm going to talk you through our census in a moment, where we've got the largest mapping exercise across the country in a decade. And that's telling us lots of data, lots of numbers. That numbers tells us stories. Those stories are what we can then tell to politicians, tell to the Treasury, tell to funders, tell to young people, tell to the media. And in doing that, we're trying to influence a more positive, brighter future for youth services across England. And I say England, although we're doing more and more work with Scotland and Wales. We're also the organisation for the Commonwealths, and we're doing more and more work with our Commonwealth colleagues, who are also joining us today. And so, we use that expertise, we use that knowledge to enrich what we do. We have a whole range of products and services. I'm not going to bore you with them all, but we have quality frameworks. We're doing more work around safeguarding. There are more organisations approaching the NYA for us to come and help improve safeguarding practice. How do, particularly national organisations are saying to us, how do I know that my brilliantly bulletproof safeguarding policy, or we think we're really proud of it, how do I know on a wet Tuesday night in Newcastle this is being used? And how can we assess that? How can we understand that? And the NYA is doing work around understanding that. And there's been some interesting challenges to us through the pandemic, because through the pandemic, everybody looked at the NYA. You had to. If you wanted to know what you could do, you couldn't do, you had to read our document and understand it. But as we come out of the pandemic, and while we're not out of the woods yet, we're definitely stepping back from the brink. More people are contacting us going, well, how do I now you helped me raise my game through the pandemic. You helped us tell us what a good risk assessment looked like, what proper planning was. You helped us understand the things we needed to think through. Please don't stop doing that as we re-emerge, because actually we want to hold that level. We want to raise that bar again, frankly, and we need your help to do so. So that's something the NYA is currently exploring. We've got things like the National Youth Advisory Board, and we're going to be joined later by Tony, who's the chair of that, and some members of that, bringing together nearly 30 organisations across the sector, bringing funders with government, with young people, with youth sector organisations at a national, local, regional level to have a voice, have a collective impact and have a collective voice. And we're very proud that through the spending review, there were collective submissions put in on behalf of the Back Youth Alliance, and there are brilliant organisations here, a member of that group, but also the Advisory Board, a much broader sector-driven group as well. And we are collectively trying to influence and lobby the future of that. So, the NYA is working to improve quality of youth work practice, the quality of young people's experience, safeguard the youth sector for the future, and advocate for more of it, of course, and more funding, which I'll come on to in a wee bit. One thing I did want to touch on, so when I'll tell this story a wee bit, but I remember just before the first lockdown, about a week before, I was asked urgently to go to a meeting in Whitehall to meet with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer because there was a medical emergency coming. And this thing in Wuhan, China, had sort of been in the news a wee bit, but not much. And we literally dropped everything, arrived at Whitehall that afternoon, had a briefing with Dr. Jenny Harries, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, who said, you've got 6 weeks to get ready. And I rang in Diddy from UK Youth on the way out, and we agreed, right, we're going to build a website, we're going to do this. And then a week, and we were told we had 6 weeks. 1 week later, we moved into lockdown. And the speed of that. And within that week, we pivoted the whole organization. Job descriptions went out the window, structures went out the window, the whole team changed what they did. And you've all seen the results of that. And I'm very proud of our team and what we've been able to achieve in that process. I'm also really proud of the partnerships and the collaboration that stemmed. Our regional colleagues on a call instantly working out how to, what we can do collectively. Colleagues from uniform sector, scouts and guides and others, all piling in to say, right, what do we need to do? How do we do it? Quite complicated stuff, but a lot of history and barriers to collaboration just evaporated, which was magical, and we've absolutely loved it. And then we've gone the way through the pandemic, and as we come out of the pandemic, we've had to take a look and go, well, I've got a strategy, it's still fit for purpose, but what do we want to do? We need to listen and learn how we need to reinvent ourselves for a post-pandemic era. The pandemic is going to leave a scar on the sector. It's going to leave challenges for young people for many years to come. If we think through the pandemic, 3 times the number of young people now need access to youth services. That's 3 million young people now need access to youth services than they did before the pandemic. And as part of that process, there's a huge demand for support at a time when there's less resource, there's less public awareness. A lot of focus on health issues, less focused on the social issues. Young people, they reckon it's going to take at least 7 years to catch up their education. But if you're a 15-year-old, you're not going to get that catch up because you could leave school 2 years later and good luck to you. But if you're an 11-year-old, you might get that support. So there's a generation of young people that need our support, need youth services in all its shapes and forms and varieties more now than ever. But one thing we want to know is, well, okay, we've got to reinvent ourselves again. We've got to think about how is the NYA perceived? What do we need to focus on in the future, and what might we do differently going forward? And so we appointed a consultant who interviewed 30 youth sector funders, CEOs, and senior stakeholders for us. And we've got 125 pages of the most rich feedback an organization could ever receive. And some of those were from CEOs who were representing massive networks, others were representing smaller groups, some were funders who represent, millions and millions of pounds that flow across the youth sector, telling us what they thought of us, what they understood about us, what we could do differently. And there are a few key things that we took away from that exercise. The first was that we were described as being in broadcast mode. We're telling everybody what to do all the time, and we're not involving people enough genuinely and meaningfully in the products and services, the things we develop and how we do so. So we've heard that, and I think some of that might be the pandemic. We've been broadcasting, you must do the following. There's an element of that, but there's also, we're very good at getting people in the room, but we need to do better at inviting people to have, to take control of certain pieces of work, to have more integral involvement in what we're doing. So we're committed to changing that. We are committed to evolving what we do over the next 6 to 9 months as we reinvent the NYA for the next phase of the sector's journey. We were told we're brilliant at getting people in the room, but we need to connect you more together, and we need to connect. People want to feel directly connected to the NYA. Grassroots youth projects out on the ground I keep picking on Newcastle, in Liverpool, want to be able to directly have a line to the NYA, talk to the NYA collectively, have a direct opportunity to discuss things with us or influence our work. And that can't, that's a real challenge to us because you just can't do it on that scale. And there are good regional structures, and we invest in and support those structures. But we need to think a bit harder about how do we create the direct connect between out there on the ground and the NYA. And the message is sort of, you're doing all right at national level. That's great for you, and we're really proud of you. And thank you so much for your doing. But we're really struggling on the ground. We feel a lot of pain. We feel very vulnerable. We feel scared in places, and we need better access to support, better encouragement along. So we're thinking quite hard about that as well, and how we can do that, and do that with partners. And we'll be working with funders to come with collective asks, I think, going forward about how we develop those things. And then the last one was to network people together, and how we create a membership or a means of people, organizations coming together. And one of the things the pandemic did was everybody had to follow the same thing. So it didn't matter whether you were a scout group, or whether you were an army cadet project, or whether you were a voluntary youth project running the church hall by a group of parents, everybody followed the same thing. And there's a real power in that message, and there's a real opportunity in that to take that further, and we'll be exploring those things. I don't have answers to these. We need to go and do more research, more consultation, more engagement, come and talk to more people. But our commitment as an organisation that learns and develops is to go and do those things, and we'll come back to you later on next year and tell you what we're going to do about it. Really open to conversation. So if you want to grab me over coffee or lunch, really interested in your thoughts about this. One thing I wanted to update you all on was the national census. This was a bit of a wild idea. We hadn't mapped the youth sector in over a decade. Anybody who's followed the NYA's journey for a long time, we used to be funded by the Department for Education, and when we used to do an annual audit of the youth sector. Every local authority had to make a return to the NYA, telling us how much they spent, how many staff they had, how many hours of provision, how it was funded, where it was going on, and we used to publish a book. Literally, we've got them on the shelves, they're a book. And then all the money vanished in the burning of the Quangos, and our budget evaporated pretty quickly, and there was no resource to redo that. But it was really clear that if we want to make a really powerful argument to Treasury for investment, then we needed to have a new baseline of the data and be able to tell the story of the youth sector who's out there. And so the census was born. And I'm really grateful to colleagues from across a whole range of organisations who helped us. Our broad objectives was to gain a greater understanding of the youth sector. You move this on here. Where are the hot spots and cold spots? We've learned some really interesting stuff from the first round of this. I'll talk you through this in a second. Inform local strategies, local planning, where to put resources, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing a project at the moment with Stuart from the Youth Focused Northwest in Blackpool, looking at, well, what is the provision like on the ground? Where are the gaps? Where the too much, I'm sure there's never too much provision, but where there might be the duplication, how can that be smartened up? How can we help that? And the data from the census is integral to supporting that exercise. We wanted to pull together existing knowledge, find those common data standards, and get that data-rich intelligence that we can use. We are committed to making as much of that data open source as possible. It's an expensive and complicated process, but we are collectively committed to doing so. And I'm very pleased to say, and thank Beth here and the team at Census Impact for working with the NYA, because we're about to embark on building the first national data hub for the youth sector, where we will put all the youth sector data from the census, from all our workforce research, from the youth investment, the first youth investment fund, and other sources of data. And if you're setting on information and statistics and numbers, you will eventually be able to load that in as well. And collectively, the whole thing gets richer and more informed. So big thanks to Census Impact for working with us on that project. It's going to be a beast, isn't it? But we will take it head on. So the data collection was done through 8,500 surveys to completely the voluntary sector. 150 upper tier local authorities were asked to respond. These 8 organisations were amazing. They hold all this data, most of it anyway, centrally, and they were able to just supply it to us. Here you go. It was a bit complicated, but we got it. And then from the first wave, we got about a quarter, just over a quarter of the voluntary sector captured. There's work to be done to capture the rest, but it is, you know, there are a lot of organisations just running very, very voluntary, don't have paid staff. One thing I learned was, if you've got a member of staff, your organisation has almost certainly responded to the census. If you're just run by volunteers, much, much less so. Well, we've got to work to go out and find those colleagues. So I'm going to move us through a bit. So one thing we're able to do today is we're launching the first data map for this census. So it won't work till later on, so don't look at this link, but at the end of the day, you can go to this link and you'll be able to find our data map. And I actually set up leads. And all the dots will show you where projects are and what they're doing, how to get in touch with them. There'll be a version of this for young people in the future. But for now, this is what we've learned from the first round of the data. And it will help you understand projects and who they're working with and those kinds of things. There's also going to be a route. If you go and search for your organisation and you're not there because you didn't fill in the survey the first time round, you'll be able to click the link and give us that extra information. That won't be there straight away, but it will be here in the near future. So the digital interactive map is a tool that you can use, and you can find out who are the partners locally, who are the projects out there, and you can encourage people to fill it in. So we're really pleased to be able to launch the first sort of part of this, but it is just the kind of basic high-level information out of the census, and we now need to drill down lower and lower and lower. So there's a few things we've learned from the census, which is there's twice as much provision in the least deprived postcodes when compared to the most deprived postcodes. So if you live in the 10% least deprived, you've got twice as much provision as the 10% most deprived. That doesn't feel right. In a world where those most deprived young people need support from youth services, there is less of it. The data suggests the further north you go, youth organisations are more likely, based in areas higher disadvantage. So further north you go, the more likely you'll find youth projects in those higher need areas, which is, great. Most commonly delivered targeted provision was towards young people's mental health and well-being. Survey after survey after survey, whether it be Make Your Mark or other things, talk routinely around young people's mental health and well-being. So this doesn't surprise us, but it is a fact. We also learned that 2/3 of the voluntary sector organisations are offering programmes supporting that mental health and well-being. And 81% of local authority provisions are also doing so. So the sector is understanding that these are the needs and challenges young people are facing, and we are responding, which is fantastic. And then there's work to do on other areas. And then the census, 1 in 4 organisations are in areas of deprivation, which I've already touched on. This one's an interesting one. This will show you the types of areas of work. You'll get these slides afterwards. But we can see that this is the least deprived to the most deprived. And actually, supporting looked after children and care leavers is much better in the least deprived areas than the most deprived areas. And that's a challenge just as a country to address. Other areas, not quite so bad. Supporting mental health, the other way around. More provision in the more deprived areas than the least. You can find all this information in our first summary report of the findings. This is launched today as well. You can go on our website, the QR code will take you to that, and you'll be able to download this report at the end of today. This is a 20-odd page report with all the statistics and graphs and information that we've learned so far. What you can't do is go and pick it out and search it yourself, but we've created a summary of that information. And I know today the Guardian, Rob's here, so the Guardian have published an article today on this stuff. So thank you to them. So please download this report and take a look. It's full of really useful information. Just want to quickly touch on our policy and research work. We've been busy trying to champion young people through the pandemic, publishing all the various reports that we've done on the side of the guidance around, education, our rural report rocketed. It obviously hit a nerve and took off. Education catch up. We work with Youth Employment UK around youth work and youth unemployment. We work with Brooke around young people's health and well-being, co-authoring these reports with us. These are huge pieces of work, and thank you for taking the time to read them and look at them. And I know they've made a difference. I know they've been read by departments and officials, and they've certainly been looked at. One of the things that's coming for the future is around the statutory duty for youth services. Now, today's not going to be touching on that particularly, but the government has reactivated its process of reviewing the statutory duty, the legal responsibility on local authorities. I always say youth work is a statutory service. It is in the statute, it is in the Education Inspection Act 2006. It's just the guidance that's published by the government around that is so woolly. You could ride a coach and horses through it, do what is reasonably practical or do what's sufficient. Well, I mean, anyone can make any measure. There's no benchmarks to that, and there is work to do. One of the things the NYA did was we published guidance last year to local authorities, and I know from direct discussions with some of those local authorities that at least 30 local authorities stopped planned cuts to their youth services as a result of this report. This is what we do well. This is what we do really good at, and we want to be doing more. I don't know whether we can keep those cuts from coming next year, but we will have another go. Our policy work's really key in that it's about cross-collaboration, working with other organisations, amplifying the voices of young people, the needs of young people, what they're telling us they want us to understand. We are pushing for strengthening statutory youth work services because it is a statutory service and it should be properly funded. We're not fussed about who delivers it. It can be run by the voluntary sector, the local authority, but it needs to be properly funded and coordinated and supported. Focusing on local issues for local young people and really drilling down to those very micro areas, because that is where young people's community sits and that is where we've got to focus. Something we're really passionate about is giving young people a voice in all of that process. It's no good sitting in a room designing services and not actually listening or talking to young people. I know this audience understands this stuff. You'd be amazed how many don't still. And so there is much more work to do around making sure that young people are seen as the experts. Well, young people in this room today could have PhDs in their own lived experience, and that lived experience is what is important when it comes to making decisions about funding, about resourcing, about services at time and day, all sorts of things, the programs, and we are really keen to progress on that. So one of our big asks for the spending review was the resourcing for 10,000 new qualified youth workers. These are J&C professionally qualified, fully funded posts, 20,000 youth support workers and 40,000 trained volunteers. And working with the Back Youth Alliance, collectively, we made a push for this through the spending review. I don't think we got it, but there's a lot of woolliness in the current spending review numbers, but we will keep pushing for this because young people deserve that level of support. Spending review, just thought I would touch on this quick. Turn the page rapidly. At the moment, I'm a bit confused. I know that certain numbers have been announced and there's certain numbers in the press, but what that money gets spent on, how it gets used, we're not clear. And so we may learn a bit more today when James comes from DCMS. We've got to be nice to him. He's just the official. He's not the politician making the decisions. But we're not that clear. We know there's a chunk for capital. We're not clear on how much is revenue. We don't know whether the revenue is just for where the capital spend goes at the same time. We know it's going to go into 60 areas, but we're not clear where those 60 areas are at this point. And we're in a bit of a lull because what the government, I believe, tried to do was say, here's the spending review, here's the budget. Give us a couple of days after that to sort of get some headlines on some key things. And now we're into COP26. So for the next 2 weeks, the government communications lines are blocked by all the COP stuff. And so they will wait until after COP to tell us more information in the few weeks after the COP closes. And that may mean we have to wait. So when we first booked this event, we thought, great, it's going to be 3 days after the spending review, we'll be able to talk about this stuff. Ministers coming, this will go well. Maybe not. We're not quite clear what they'll say. I know they want to say as much as they're allowed to, and I know they're keen to tell us everything. But actually, as ever, there is a government control around communications messaging, and we've just got to, understand how that works. But, the big question for me that I've still not seen in the spending review is where's the international investment? We were sort of told all the way build up that the Erasmus Plus replacement funding, whatever that might look like, would be announced at the spending review, and it wasn't announced by the Chancellor. Now, the other funding was announced for DCMS, which they haven't been able to say what it's for. That might be built into that. We're just not clear at this point. But as soon as we are clear on that, I don't doubt NYA and everybody else will, or the national organisations will update the sector and keep you all informed. So that's the key things that I wanted to run through with you today, talking through our census and some of the key early learnings, launched the map and the report. Please go and take a look at those. They're really important. And to give you a flavour of where we're going as an organisation, we're going in, we've got a residential with all our board and staff at the end of November, where we'll be thinking about the feedback from the perceptions work. We've commissioned other research and other surveys to inform us. And we'll come back to you next year with how the NYA is going to transform itself or evolve further. We need to do so, we've always got to do so, and we'll carry on.